Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I wanted to talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, if that's okay. Part of it is just me suddenly waking up and realizing that it's now 2024 and this game comes out in like 2 months. Like 2 months. I don't know about you, but I've been waiting years. It's been, how many years has it been? When did it come out? 2020? Final Fantasy VII Remake, was it 2020? Right? I don't know. It's been multiple years that I've been sitting here waiting for the story to continue because, spoiler warning, I don't know where it's going. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I've been seeing a lot of theorizing online about so-and-so character, doing this or this happening. I just think we don't know, and I think that's the point that a lot of the trailers have been trying to make for us. They sort of awkwardly call it the unknown journey, which is not great writing. Maybe it sounded better in Japanese, I'm guessing, but a little bit awkward. But I think the point does get through that this is not what we expected it to be, right? Before we get into it, let me just ask that you would consider liking the video if you do in fact like this. Or you can give it one of these. If you hate it, that's fine, I guess. Also, if you are not subscribed and you like JRPGs and content about them, consider giving me a subscribe too, because that's about all we do around here. We talk about JRPGs. And make sure to drop your theories down in the comments below. Let me know if you agree with me. Let me know if you think I'm completely off my rocker. I want to hear from you down below. All right, now one more thing. We're gonna definitely be getting into Final Fantasy VII Remake spoilers. I kind of need to talk about the end of the previous game in order to even get into the second game. Also, I guess we're kind of talking Final Fantasy VII spoilers in general, right? If you haven't played Final Fantasy VII and you've been waiting, putting it off, maybe getting distracted as new games come out, your backlog gets higher and higher, you're intending to get to Final Fantasy VII someday, and yet for some reason you clicked on a video about theories about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I don't know, you're out there. If I'm speaking to you, hi. But if that's you, you may not want to watch this because we're going to be talking a lot about Final Fantasy VII Remake and about the broader Final Fantasy VII story in general. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The first thing that I feel like I need to get out there, and I know that I'm not the first person to say this, I'm not claiming any sort of originality here. Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a remake. Okay, bear with me. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a sequel to Final Fantasy VII, told through, I don't know, how do I want to put it? Through the lens of a remake? Let me put it this way. I don't see the word remake in the subtitle as being an adjective, if that makes sense. It's not Final Fantasy VII, the remake, or the Final Fantasy VII remake. It is Final Fantasy VII Remake. I almost see it as a verb, and it's a verb directed at the characters themselves. They made it pretty clear from relatively early on in Final Fantasy VII Remake that we were not just going to see the same story told in PlayStation 4 caliber high-definition graphics. That would have been fine. I think a lot of us were expecting that. Would have been very cool with that. But that's not what they wanted to do. The first inclination that we get that this is going to be a little bit more than just like an HDification of this deified game is the introduction of the Whisperers, the sort of, I don't know, Harry Potter Dementor sort of looking Grim Reaper guys that fly around and get all up in people's business when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. I think we see them first with Aerith. They're harassing her. Cloud can't see them until he touches her, and then all of a sudden his eyes are open to these things. And throughout the course of Final Fantasy VII Remake, we see pretty clearly that Aerith knows a lot more about what is going on than she did in the original Final Fantasy VII. The fact that she's the first person to experience contact with the Whisperers should be enough to convince us of that. But the fact is that she says certain things throughout the course of the first game that really just suggests that she is coming into this with foreknowledge of what happened in the original Final Fantasy VII. We also know that when Aerith touches people in certain ways, or I don't know if she can control it or if it happens with magic plot gremlins or something, but she'll touch people and they will remember things that have not happened to them yet, right? She does it to Marlene, and Marlene suddenly knows who she is, and she knows all about Marlene. I believe she even mentions Barrett's name to Marlene when she's never been told Barrett's name at that point in the story, so there's no way she could know. She shows Cloud the moment of her death in the original game, because you see that brief flash when they're climbing over the rooftops, I believe, in Remake. He sees that brief flash of her hand or the white materia falling or whatever. Things that, again, haven't happened yet, that Aerith seems to be aware of and that nobody else should know, right? So it seems that she has the ability to convey some of these things to others. There's maybe either there's a reason that she can't or shouldn't tell everyone everything right up front, or she's not able to do that. She says herself in one of the trailers, she says the future, even if it's been written, can still be changed. And I think that's as much Aerith talking to her companions as it is Square talking to us. I don't know, just as an aside, I don't know if this is like a trend in Japanese filmmaking right now. Maybe 2 isn't enough to be a trend. But, and spoilers for, I guess, the Neon Genesis Evangelion reboot films, if we need to say that. I don't know. These audiences do crossover. So I guess Neon Genesis Evangelion reboot film spoilers. That series of 4 films that started out, again, ostensibly as a remake of Evangelion, actually ended up being a sequel to both the anime and the manga of Evangelion, which were kind of in their own realities. It's complicated, and I don't think that it makes sense to get into it now, but I feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake developers are doing something very similar here, in that they are using, again, like I said, they're using the lens of a remake to tell a new story using familiar characters. So anyway, my point is, Aerith knows about the events of Final Fantasy VII. She seems to know that she's going to die, or that she's destined to, at least. In the beginning of the game, up until, I guess, the very end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Aerith is convinced that she is still going to die. She tells Cloud, for example, not to fall in love with her because she understands that it's going to be something that's inevitable. She's going to die. However, when they kill the Whisperers, I think that opens up the possibilities to essentially limitless ends. Now, I've heard people on the internet say, but Aerith has to die, right? Like, that's the linchpin of Final Fantasy VII. That is the point of the story, even. Like, none of the end game would be possible if Aerith didn't die, right? I got some bad news. Aerith never needed to die. Aerith's death in the original Final Fantasy VII was pointless. And I have always felt like that was obvious, but I see a lot of people disagree with that. I've read their arguments. I just don't feel like it holds up to the story that's being told in Final Fantasy VII. Aerith dies. She doesn't sacrifice herself for the planet. She didn't go off with any intention of dying. She fully expected to go pray for Holy, come back, rejoin the group, and carry on. Her death was pointless, and that's part of what makes it so sad, right? She's not heroically sacrificing herself for the fate of the planet. She's getting murdered by a crazy guy with a long sword. The other thing that I feel is important and maybe isn't talked about as much is that the developers that are working on this game, many of the key people are, the same people that worked on Final Fantasy VII. They don't need or want to tell this exact story again, right? Now, you might say, well, then why are they making a remake? Why aren't they just making an original IP? Why don't they blah, 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 blah? Okay, fair, right? Fair. You could argue that if they don't want to give the people what they want, which is Final Fantasy VII with HD graphics and voice acting and new combat or whatever, then they should just make something else. You can make that argument. I totally support your right to make that argument. I don't think it's a good one, and I think that from the perspective of the creators of the game, this is their art, and I'm going to let them, I guess, make the art that they want to. And, we as consumers can choose whether or not to support it with our money, with our time, with our video production, whatever. But we have as much of a choice in this as they do. But I think that their choice is pretty clearly, we love this world, we love these characters, we even love this story, but we don't want to tell it again. I know some people will say that, well, Aerith jumped in the live stream at the end and came and, backed up the power of Holy to hold back Meteor and save the planet. Yeah, kind of, sort of. I think what Aerith did there was, at best, buy a generation or two for humanity, right? But we know that 500 years from then, that everything is just overrun. Like, whatever life that they're rebuilding, as you can see in the movie Advent Children, for example, whatever life they're building there is not going to last. And that's sad. That's why I read the Final Fantasy VII novel On the Way to a Smile, which is maybe the most ironically named book I've ever read. And I've described it to friends as basically what happens to all of your favorite Final Fantasy VII characters after the game when they all develop clinical depression, because it is one of the saddest, most depressing books I've ever read. And I think that sometimes happens with younger creators, is they go all in on this emotion, this sadness, because it's honestly not that hard to evoke that in an audience. But what I think we're seeing with Final Fantasy VII Remake, and what I hope we continue to see in Rebirth, is more mature storytellers that understand that there are more levers they can pull, more buttons they can press, than just make the audience sad. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to feel sad at some point in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I think very likely somebody is going to die. I don't think it's going to be Aerith. For example, in 2 of the trailers that we've seen so far, Tifa is referenced very specifically as having died, and questioning whether or not Cloud thinks she's some sort of imposter, right? This was not a line that was really carried through from the original Final Fantasy VII. She was gravely injured, certainly, no doubt. But Sephiroth claims that he killed her. She's dead. Now, could he just be mistaken? I guess, but that seems like a weird bit of dialogue to highlight in your big trailer, right? A little bit strange. So maybe this time around, it's Tifa. We also have the sort of wild card of Zack, right? Zack, who famously, Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core spoilers? Or Final Fantasy VII spoilers, I guess? I don't know. Zack, who famously dies before Final Fantasy VII even begins, is alive and well and walking through Midgar and talking to people and somehow involved in the story. Like, we see him talking to Marlene, I think? Like, there's things happening that are very, very, very different. And Zack is suddenly a part of the story when he was never supposed to be, at least according to the lore of the original, right? So does Zack dying in place of Aerith sort of write the timeline in a certain way? Do we even need to worry about writing the timeline when the Whispers are gone and fate is basically wide open and can be whatever the characters want it to be? I don't know. Also, I think it's pretty clear that regardless of what happens with Aerith or Zack or Tifa or any of the characters that conceivably could end up dying a tragic death in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Sephiroth has a different plan this time, right? Now, it may involve some of the same steps. We know the characters from the trailers, we can see they go to many of the same places, they're talking to many of the same people, probably doing many of the same things. So perhaps his plan, his strategy involves some of the same steps that he took before. But the fact that he's, approaching them at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake and, leading this whole big battle with Cloud in the stars, and you have 7 seconds until whatever, blah, blah, blah. That kind of weird nonsense that sometimes they like to throw in there just for fun. Sephiroth is doing something different, which has led me, and I think a lot of other people theorizing about this game on the internet, to believe that, much like Aerith, Sephiroth is aware of this time loop. He's aware that this has all happened before, and that he essentially failed, more or less failed, in his original plan. So it seems unlikely that he would go about things exactly the same way. And if killing Aerith was the thing that caused him ultimately to fail, like if you go by that, Aerith came and helped with the live stream, came and helped Holy hold back Meteor and bought humanity a little bit more time, then, if Sephiroth really wanted to wipe everything out, he would not be happy, right? He'd be like, well, that was a mistake, right? Well, I shouldn't have stuck her with the big sword, right? Like, she's going to be a problem. So it seems unlikely to me, knowing what we know from Remake, that Sephiroth would have the same plan he did before. I think he's doing something different. He has a different strategy in mind, and I would venture a guess that killing Aerith is probably not high up on his list anymore. Now look, if you are upset by the changes that are being made in this remake, I understand that. Honestly, I kind of get how you might feel. Let me give you an example. And spoilers, I guess, for Scott Pilgrim takes off on Netflix. Jeez, we're spoiling everything. But I'm a huge Scott Pilgrim fan. I've loved the graphic novels, I love the movie. It's just a phenomenal series in my mind, and when they finally, after, I don't know, 15 years or however long it's been since the movie, announced that they were doing an anime adaptation, I was like over the moon excited. I was so thrilled. Very quickly, as I started watching it, I realized, oh, that's not what they're doing. They're actually, again, kind of like this, making a sequel done through the lens of a remake. So maybe it's not just a Japanese thing. I mean, I know it's an anime, it's animated in Japan, but Brian Lee O'Malley is definitely not Japanese, so I don't know. Anyway, so they're doing a very similar thing, and initially, as I was watching the 10 episodes that made up Scott Pilgrim Takes Off on Netflix, I was disappointed that it wasn't what I expected it to be. It wasn't the remake, it wasn't the reimagining of the graphic novels from the ground up that I wanted it to be. However, as I continued watching it, as I understood what they were doing, I began to appreciate it, and then upon watching it again, I just outright loved it. So, if you are like I was with Scott Pilgrim, with Final Fantasy VII, I would encourage you to sit with it for a while, think about it, play the games, let the story that they're telling now work on you. And if you do that and you still don't like it, you still wish it was a straight up high definition remake of Final Fantasy VII, fair enough, totally get it. But maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that you'll find that you actually do really enjoy what it is that they're doing here. And remember, Final Fantasy VII, the original, it's available basically everywhere, on every platform, for not that much money. So you can play Final Fantasy VII anytime. And I'm not gonna stop playing Final Fantasy VII just because the remake exists, right? Like, they can coexist. They can live together because, like I'm arguing, they're actually two completely different things. I don't know, this has been a rambly video, but I've just been thinking a lot about Rebirth, and I want to talk about it, and I want to hear what you all think, and I would love it if you would let me know down in the comments. Again, if you wouldn't mind liking the video, that would be super fantastic. And again, if you aren't subscribed, if you would consider subscribing, that would make my day. Anyway, until next time, bye.